Now we're going to be moving to the next set of presentations, and they have one thread in common, which is how do we put our decarbonization plans in practice. We're going to be starting with the different, like really, how do we translate them into like actionable, and like which tools we have at our disposal for that. And then we will zoom into two specific cases, the case of of North America and how it differs from the way that Europe operates, and then we will also be zooming in China's single power market and how it's using green power purchase agreements. So now we're going to be starting with the first one of these presentations. It's going to be how to translate your decarbonization roadmap into an actionable plan. And for that, I'm delighted to invite an international energy and sustainability consultant at ENC Consultants, Dina Karamarko.
Well, if I knew that Jens will be talking about Ben Market and Ben Marie and Mike, I would also tell you what they did with decarbonization all this time, but we'll keep it general. So over the last 2 years, you know better than me that your industry has been through tremendous period. Of course, all these challenges and energy crisis that, at least that we saw in Europe, has made you to do some things and to make some decisions that were not easy to take. And of course, a lot of companies have put decarbonization on the back burner because that was not a priority, that was not really in the, let's say, the most important thing to do. But there were also other companies that were really forging ahead, and they knew, okay, this transition, this decarbonization is happening one way or the other, so we might as well get started as well, especially if you look at it from the risk management point of view. Of course, if we take a look at the global picture, where are we, not only as industry, but also as a world as a whole? Right now, we have around 30% of renewable energy in the electricity mix, which is not, something that you would neglect. But if we take a look at predictions of International Renewable Energy Agency, then they are expecting this to increase even up to 85% by 2050. And on top of that, if we take a look at the predictions up to 2050 for the share of renewables in the whole energy mix on a global level, we're talking about 50%. Now, these are quite some ambitious targets, but the question is how to get there, of course. And you know more than, you know better than we do what are all the challenges that your industry is facing, but there are also challenges that we are all witnessing when it comes to decarbonization roadmaps. And just to name a few, for example, lack of internal communication and education on decarbonization, lack of internal alignment on which goals do we take, which targets do we put in, and of course, next to that, quite lengthy project negotiations, the change of legislative setup, not to mention all the market disruptions and changes that are happening. And on top of that, if you're busy with decarbonization on a global level, of course you realize, not in every country you have equal conditions. So this is also something to be mindful of. Well, decarbonization, as we have observed it in many conversations we had with our clients and prospects, is not an easy thing to achieve. And it gets quite complex. But there are, of course, certain things that might sound like a one-shot quick fix, such as going for carbon offset. You just take it once and then it's off your agenda. But what sometimes clients do not realize, this might be a doable short quick fix, but it does not structurally change anything on the long run. So that is why a lot of corporates have started setting up their decarbonization roadmaps and making actionable plans out of these. Of course, these agendas, these decarbonization roadmaps have more or less the same agenda, and that is they focus on electrification, energy reduction, investments in renewable energy, and also energy efficiency. And if we take a look on a global level, of course, every company is in a different sector, and these decarbonization roadmaps look different because they depend on a lot of factors. But if we take a look at the aim and the purpose of these decarbonization roadmaps, that is exactly the same. And that is to go for carbon reduction and make sure that you choose those options that are viable to take at this moment in time. And of course, speaking about these options, they are, I mean, you all know what is possible on the market at the moment. If we talk about on-site PPAs, off-site PPAs, and energy certificate attributes, biogas certificates, but also energy efficiency and energy reduction. Well, we will, of course, focus as energy procurement specialists on the first three. So if we talk about energy attribute certificates on a global level, what we saw over the past 2 years is a changing environment. If we simply focus on Europe, and if we take a look at the cost of greening 2 years ago and right now, we're talking about a surge of more than 700%. You've heard it right. So those of you who have been already busy buying certificates in Europe know that 2 years ago you could green at 60 euro cents up to €1 per megawatt hour, and now that can easily cost you between 7 and 8 euros per megawatt hour. And of course, that's not a cost that you easily take, and also not something that you easily absorb and sell to your upper management. But a lot of companies are realizing this, okay, you need to start somewhere. But if we take a look at global level, we do not see the similar price spikes in other countries or other regions on the globe. For example, in North America, as well as in Asian countries, we see that these price increases were quite moderate. And that comes on the back of ample supply of renewables, and also the fact that on a European scale, corporates had much more ambitious targets when it comes to reaching their decarbonization goals. Of course, if you need to start right now with buying of energy attribute certificates, our best, let's say, suggestion would be to really focus on those countries which have high emission factors and reasonably low prices. For example, US and China are perfect examples of the same. On the other side, if you want to avoid getting hit by these energy attribute costs, you might want to avoid going for certificates in countries like Singapore, North Korea, or Australia because of extremely high prices of these certificates. And of course, this is something that is just one element in the whole picture. But if we take a look at corporates with whom we are having discussions today, they are all interested in going for certificates, either because there's nothing else that you can do in that specific country or region, or because other options are already utilized, or you need to start doing something and showing that you're also making a contribution when it comes to decarbonization. And despite of these price spikes, we still see that companies are interested in decarbonizing, but there's also a change of mindset when it comes to the choice of certificates that they take. In the past, well, how difficult can it be? You just go for the cheapest one and then it's off your agenda. But with the changing legislation, when it comes to global carbon reporting guidelines and also auditing scrutiny, we realize that companies are getting pickier when it comes to the choice of certificate that they take. For example, they want to know the year, the commissioning year, when was it built. They want to know from which technology is it coming from which region, is it contributing to extra capacity next year, etc. So all these elements do make a difference when you're choosing between energy attribute certificates on a global level. But of course, we have other options as well. And one of the options is on-site PPA. There, as you all might know, you are limited with the surface that you have available, be it on-ground application, carport, or your rooftops. We have seen from our experience that the green ratio when it comes to on-site solar potential does very rarely go with more than 10%. Of course, for wind, this is something different, but there, the biggest roadblock is actually the fact that the process to get the permits in place is quite lengthy and also quite complex. And if you manage to go through the permitting process, of course, the green ratio will be much higher than for solar, but still, it is quite an administration hustle, and also people tend to lose motivation if a permitting process takes more than 2 or even 3 years. But nevertheless, we definitely can conclude and advise to you as well that utilizing your on-site potential definitely makes sense. The reason for that is not purely financial, because you can avoid most of your non-commodity costs, but also because it creates certain visibility, both towards internal but also external stakeholders. It can help you to keep your energy prices balanced, and at least for that certain part that you green with on-site potential, you can avoid being exposed to extreme market volatility, as we have seen in the presentation of Jens. So to conclude, for on-site PPA, definitely do not forget to use that potential as well when you're working out actionable plan out of your decarbonization roadmap. Of course, the talk or the topic that has been in a lot of talks and also quite a hot topic have been off-site PPAs. Now, how difficult can it be? You go to a broker, you go to a marketplace, and you say, I want to green my emissions, or I want to green my electricity consumption in that country, and you go for a single off-site PPA. Well, usually, if it sounds too good to be true, in most cases, that is exactly the case. Of course, off-site PPAs have a great potential because they do not limit you on the surface point of view, and also there are some additional elements that can help you to risk manage these decarbonization options on the long run. What we saw on the off-site PPA market over the past 2 years, just like with electricity markets, is of course impact of inflation on the price levels. We've seen regulatory setup changing. We've also seen some legislative changes happening. And of course, the energy crisis has had an impact on the price setup of off-site PPAs, at least in Europe. Nowadays, in countries of Southeast Asia, for example, Malaysia, we can see that going for off-site PPAs can, for example, mean that you have a reduction of between 10 to 20% compared to your local tariff. So this is definitely something that is interesting to explore. But of course, there you need to be very mindful of all the risks that off-site PPAs are having with it. If we observe the global landscape of where have we seen off-site PPAs so far being actually signed and being as part of the energy procurement as other elements, we see a lot of them happening in US and Europe. But of course, there are other regions of the globe that are equally important for you. For example, in Latin countries, already for years, we have something that we refer to as off-site PPAs with a baseload product. So there, what you can have as part of your supply diversification are different contracts for the same period of time with different suppliers. And these contracts are coming from renewable sources. We do not refer to them in Latin countries as off-site PPAs, but actually if you destructure these agreements, you come to the conclusion that they are very much similar to what we call off-site PPAs. So there are opportunities out there, not only in Europe and in US, but also in Latin American countries. And what we also see are some positive market developments when it comes to having a similar setup as we have in Latin American countries like Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Argentina, in newly deregulated Asian countries such as Singapore and Japan. So keep in mind that these markets are opening up as well, not only on the side of deregulation, but also when it comes to off-site potential in other Asian countries as well. Now, if we take a look at some challenges that we observe from going into off-site PPAs, of course, first one is the fact that the maturity of market is not the same in each country. So you can not expect the same treatment as you would have in Spain, in Germany, or in US, in other sides of the globe as well. But what we do see is that in the recent years, the size of these off-site PPA deals has gone down, and also the length of these commitments. In the past, you were talking about 15 to 20 years, and nowadays you can even get a 5 or 7 years deal, which does, of course, make a difference from the risk management point of view. Now, talking about risk management there as well, in very mature markets, you can even negotiate off-site PPA deals with enough flexibility that allows you to apply more advanced hedging techniques. And of course, knowing that these off-site PPA deals are on the long term, this is of course something that does make a difference when it comes to the decision-making process. What we also see are two things that might be making a difference on the long term, and that is the price cannibalization, where you have an influx of renewables during a certain period of time, and this is having an impact on spot electricity prices. Now, for all of you who are global buyers, it's no big news to see at certain points during the day negative prices in Europe and in US. But for the first time, we see similar things happening in China, for example, in Shandong province, and in Australia as well. So this is also something that you want to keep in mind when choosing your projects. Now, of course, on the criteria parameters, this is something that is also very important. Well, usually in the talks with our clients or prospects about decarbonization and how to make it an actionable plan, the first thing that comes on the agenda is we want to make savings. Yes, we all do, and of course, this is a very important element. But you should not forget that there are other criteria that are equally important. For example, can you apply risk management? Does a certain decarbonization option bring you in a position that you can diversify your energy portfolio? Does it contribute to carbon reduction, especially if you have certain goals and targets for a period of your decarbonization roadmap or for a specific region? So all of these elements can also and should be observed as part of your decision-making process, and also the criteria on which you rank certain projects. And of course, to conclude, what we would always recommend is to not exclude any of the options that are available, because decarbonization is something that you should look rather as a marathon than a sprint. And of course, having internal stakeholder alignment and their buy-in does make a big difference when it comes to, first of all, having an understanding of what is out there, mapping your opportunities, and also going for those places where it makes most sense to start, or where you can see that the chances of actually succeeding in your decarbonization are most likely to happen. So that would be from my side when it comes to the, let's say, a short summary on decarbonization roadmap and how you can make it an actionable plan. And I believe, Anna, that you will now take over and introduce others. Thank you.